Hi everyone, this is episode 17 of Happier Active. I'm Ellie. I'm really excited for this episode. I had Megan Dunham, who's an energetics educator and small business coach. And she's a really great example of exactly the kind of thing I'm talking about when I talk about, finding a niche and making it really work for you. So I think what Megan does for some people is probably quite out there, and I mean this as a compliment. I absolutely love when people do this. She blends astrology and other energetic work into helping people work with those aspects of themselves and their spirituality and helping them make it work in their business life. And for the kind of people who like that sort of thing, this is like a perfect way to really holistically use that spiritual side and that business side and blend them together to really like turbocharge your capabilities. And I think the way she talks about it is really interesting and not something that you see a lot of. So I'm super excited for people to hear about that, because I say it at the end and I really mean it. I think it's really amazing to find something that for some people would sound really off the wall and then like really ground it in practical advice that can really help you day to day make real changes in what you're doing and move forward really positively. So I'm really excited for you to hear her talk about it, because it's really interesting. As ever, absolutely love hearing back from people with their thoughts and feedback, and any subjects you'd like to hear me cover, any questions you have. I am moving towards planning some standalone 15-minute quick episodes that'll be on Fridays, I think. Some of them are going to be like educational bits about topics that I get asked about a lot, and some of them will be like Q&As. So I'm just starting to plan some of them. But there'll be sort of 15-minute kind of 101 masterclass type things. So again, if you've got any thoughts about things I guess some of the feedback I've had is that like quite often we'll be throwing out terms and people would like a kind of deep dive into those. So things like, gut health, human design, like all these kind of terms that people use a lot, and maybe a sort of 15-minute masterclass deep dive into them would be helpful, so that people kind of have some more ideas about some of these things. So I am working on that. Hopefully they're going to start coming out in the next month or so as well. And I can't wait for you to hear this episode. Great. There are many ways to find your path to better health and happiness, and what works is highly individualised, and my philosophy is that most people are more likely to find that if they're an active participant in their own journey. So this is a space to start exploring some of the rich and varied areas in which people practice, so you can start thinking about what resonates with you and discover new or different practices to either start or deepen your own health practices. And today I have Megan Dunham, who's an energetics educator and a small business coach. So welcome, and why don't you tell us a bit about what it is that you do?
Thanks, Ellie. So glad to be here. So hello, everyone. My name is Megan, and I have owned my own business for the past 5 years. I began as a marketing coach for women in the holistic and spiritual spaces, and very quickly realized that there was a space for me to become an educator about these particular topics, because people either knew a lot about one thing or not a lot about something else. And I saw that there was such a beautiful opportunity to introduce people to the intersection of all of these modalities and how they could support us holistically. And so that's when I kind of began to shift, and now I have a membership community, and I support small business owners to really better understand their own unique energetic blueprints or profiles as it relates to astrology, Ayurveda, yoga philosophy, human design, and then kind of use those things to incorporate them into their business and into their lifestyle, so that they feel more lit up, more excited, more supported, more fulfilled in what they do.
Oh, I love that. And it's so interesting, actually. There's quite a few people that I've talked to on this have said that they're like kind of aha moment for their business was when they started incorporating either their spirituality or their that side of themselves into their business, and that suddenly made everything click and like take off.
Yes, that happened for me. So I began my business right before COVID lockdown. In the end of 2019, and at that point I think that I was operating a lot out of fear. I knew that I was really good at teaching people. I have a background in education. I have a degree in education. And I also knew that I was really great at teaching people about marketing because that was the field that I had just left. And so it felt like the most natural step that I should take to start my own business. But it wasn't completely fulfilling for me. There was always this kind of little piece that was missing. And then in 2022, in the spring of 2022, I actually got COVID myself for the first time. And it was a very earth-shattering and surreal experience for me. I was hospitalized, with heart issues, and it was just kind of this weird experience that I'd never had before. I think that when people talk about COVID in particular, it's kind of this, not just this physical experience that you're having, but also a psychological experience, because there was so much fear around, what it was and what it would do. And when I got COVID and was hospitalized, and then, I was released and sent home, I realized that I needed to make some changes. And that's when I decided that I was going to completely blow up my business and start from scratch. So at that point, I was really kind of focusing more on retainer clients and high ticket experiences. And in February of 2023, I'll never forget, I created this kind of little reel with a trend at the time where I had a blanket over my head and I was kind of like walking away from the camera, and I was like heading into my sabbatical. And all of 2023 was just kind of burning down everything that I had done previously and trying out new things. And it, I started teaching workshops, and I started teaching people about astrology. I started doing astrology readings. And that led me to where I am today, where last summer I started a membership community, and I feel like it's just the beginning.
That's amazing. And it's amazing, isn't it, what like a really difficult experience can like help you reevaluate things and give you clarity. And it's always difficult to talk about these things without being too like sounding like you're being sort of doing the toxic positivity thing, like, but it's obviously you would prefer those things didn't happen, but sometimes that gives you this amazing opportunity to like develop or grow.
I think so.
So the energetic pieces, how do you help people like incorporate them into their business?
Good question. So when I have people come to me as coaching clients in particular, we take a look at first thing we take a look at is their astrology chart. That's where I have the most amount of knowledge, if you will. And based on the kind of analysis of their astrology chart, we take a look at, okay, what are you currently doing in your business? And is it lighting you up? Is it fulfilling you? And if you feel like there are places where something's missing, or you're wondering, why do I always do XYZ? We take a look at your chart. And often your chart can give you a little bit of a clue about maybe why you made a specific decision to choose this certain path, or why you act a certain way when you make, this choice in your business. And so it's kind of like a guardrail in a sense, your astrology chart, where it gives you permission to begin to explore a little bit more about who you are, what makes you you, and maybe stop apologizing for the things that you don't like about yourself. And I find that once my clients have a better understanding of their own chart and, what it's comprised of and the types of strengths that they hold, it gives them permission to take more risks, to evaluate things that maybe were keeping them safe up until this point, to change something that they maybe previously thought they couldn't change, or they were afraid to change. And that's where we start.
That's really interesting. And I guess that's the kind of thing where you can say like, oh, well, this is something that you're going to be good at because of that. And that if someone has the like self-doubt that's holding them back, it kind of sets that free a bit.
Yes, it did for me, at least.
Yeah, that's really interesting, and it's really unique. I really like this as a practice, especially for people who have those hold-ups or don't quite know how to merge what can be quite an important part of your life into your work. And that's like a really good starting point because it's really grounded in work rather than, you know what I mean?
Yes. I mean, it's funny you should say that because I'm a Capricorn rising, which if you know anything about Capricorn, you know that Capricorn is the sign of work. So I guess it would make sense that I would be helping people with their businesses.
It's so funny. It's amazing how you'd like fallen into that beforehand, before you'd started like adding those things together.
Yes.
I love that. And then you mentioned a couple of other like modalities that you use as well. So I'd be interested to hear how those kind of connect to that.
Yeah, so I find that for me, astrology is kind of the beginning point because that's the most personal. We look at our charts.
Yeah.
Which, if you know anything about astrology, there's this really amazing saying that the astrology chart that you were born with will not occur again for another 25,000 years. Which means that you truly are unique. Even if your chart is very similar to someone else's, it's not exactly the same. And you can get really, really granular with the dissection of your chart, which is really fascinating to me. And then I think that sets a really great foundation for the other modalities that we focus on. So the second modality that I like to focus on with my clients is Ayurveda. And Ayurveda is the sister science of yoga. It comes from India, from that region of the world, and it is all about understanding how to live your life in tune with nature, with the world around you. So if we think about astrology being the cosmos and the sky and the universe, then we come back down and Ayurveda is all about the earth. And in Ayurveda, we believe, or the scholars have studied that there are different elements that comprise the entire world around us, the entire living world. And all of those elements combine together into what are called 3 doshas. So those 3 doshas can be found in plants and animals and the seasons, but they can also be found inside of us. So we each have a different combination of those 3 doshas, or those particular elements, and that makes up our constitution as a human. So you may have more earth inside of you, right? You may have more of the earth element. And that could mean that you really you feel more grounded, right? You're a more grounded person, you're more practical, you're more logical. And so then understanding that part of your constitution, that you have more of that inside of you, can help you understand, throughout the year when the seasons change, when the earth is perhaps a little bit more stagnant, right, in the winter and heavy, that might be a time when you feel like you have too much of that energy because you already have so much of it inside your body. And then there's so much of it around you as well in the atmosphere that then what can you do to create some balance? So that's kind of like a brief overview of Ayurveda. And so it's like learning how to understand what's inside of you, but then also understand that what's outside of you is going to influence that.
Yes, and I can see as well, like in a business context, that is useful, because that I often, when I talk to people who also have small businesses like me, it's like figuring out what order to outsource stuff in as you grow, and figuring out, but actually having some of that information as well can help you make those decisions. You know, if there's 5 things you want to outsource, but the more you know about yourself and what your strengths and capabilities are, the more you can make those decisions like confidently and better, to like free you up to do the things that you're actually better at.
Absolutely, yeah. So if we think about it from like an Ayurvedic perspective, a person who has more Vata energy, which is the elements of air and space.
Yeah.
If you think about the elements of air and space, they are much more flexible and shifting. But the Vata is typically associated with someone who is more creative and more mutable, if you will.
Yeah.
So a person who is like that may have a more difficult time with routine and structure. So perhaps you then decide that in your business you have to create more routine and structure, because you are a person who loses yourself quite frequently.
Yeah.
Whereas, you know, there is an opposite energy, and that is kapha, right? Which is very highly structured and routine-based and grounded. But maybe if you have a lot of kapha in you, you might have a hard time with the spontaneity that often comes with being an entrepreneur, the shifting, the changing.
Yeah.
And so knowing that about yourself, then what are the guardrails? What are the routines and processes that you can put in place to help you be more flexible, to help you be more creative and spontaneous?
That's such an interesting way of looking at all of this stuff. And then I have a question which you might not be able to answer. But the more I'm doing this, and I'm talking to loads of small business owners, the more I kind of notice that a lot of people who are drawn to owning their own business are pretty often quite neurodiverse. I am in that club. And then how does that work with that kind of thing? Because I think that's pretty common.
Yeah, no, it's a good question. So I myself have OCD, so that's definitely something that I have struggled with, and it's been like a path that I have. I feel like entrepreneurship is very supportive in allowing me to care for myself. Yeah. When I have those moments where I need support. But I do work with a lot of women in particular. I'd say that probably 95% of the people that I work with are women. And I work with a lot of women who are neurodiverse, who have particular needs or sensitivities or desires to support themselves in perhaps a different way than a 9-to-5 would. And I think that one of the biggest things that I've observed, I'd say particularly I'm thinking about an example of a client who had ADHD. And it was very difficult for her to commit to seeing certain things that we had, certain goals that we had set for ourselves through. And so my job then as her coach was to figure out a way to help her build in that accountability so that she could accomplish the things that she wanted to accomplish, but also hold space for herself and the unique challenges that she felt she would come across, knowing that she had ADHD. Yeah. Knowing that she could, knowing even that she could make adjustments to her goal as she was, working her way through and moving her way through, I think was a big enough permission slip for her to feel like she wanted to see these things through. Because what I've noticed is that a lot of times there's the resistance because you feel like you have to do it the same way that you did it when you had a 9-to-5 or when you were in the corporate space, and there's so much boxing in. And I think that it's important to remember that as an entrepreneur, you're the only one that gets to make these decisions. And your business can look like whatever you want it to look like. There are no rules. There are no boxes. There are no... there's nothing that says that you can't do something a certain way if you want to do it.
Yeah. So it's really interesting actually on that point is that it was a couple of things. So one, I'm seeing more and more people talk about and putting into practice like working with your menstrual cycle, and in a similar way of like at certain points in your cycle you're going to be better at doing your like content creation, the video stuff. At other points you're going to be better at just sitting down doing your admin because you don't want to, you know, get dressed up, or you're not going to be as good at communicating. And that stuff is so interesting because you obviously can't do that in a 9 to 5 really. You can a little bit, but not to the same extent. And again, it comes back to that working with your kind of energy and your natural flows in a way that serves you better, and then your business does better because you're bringing your strengths at different points in the month. And then I guess with the astrology and like moon cycles and stuff, like the year and the seasons and nature. And it's
and you can even break it down by the day too, which is really cool to me. I know that some people may be familiar with kind of like the astrological hours of the day, but I think what most people are not as familiar with is the Ayurvedic hours of the day. So we talked about like the 3 doshas, which, you know, I'll tell you what they are if anybody's interested in learning a little bit more. Kapha is the one that's a little bit more grounded. It's the earth and the water energy. And then we have Pitta, which is the water and fire. It's kind of outward moving, very focused, and think about fire, kind of like that more aggressive energy or assertive. And then we have the Vata, which is like the air and space, which is upward moving. And throughout the day, those particular doshas rule specific times. So in the mornings from 6 to 10, and then in the evenings again from 6 to 10, we have Kapha time, which is like a little bit more heavy energy. And then in the middle of the day, in the middle of the night, we have Pitta time. So one of the things that I like to incorporate in my own business, Pitta time is from 10 a.m. to 2 p.m. during the day. I like to take meetings during that time because the Pitta energy, the fire, gives me the motivation to speak more clearly, to be more focused, to be more present. And if you also think about it from Ayurveda, you know, has this whole branch. I think this is what most people know Ayurveda for, is how to eat with the seasons. So in Ayurveda, we have something called the Ani, which is the digestive fire inside of our bellies. And the Ani is most present and readily available for us at noon during Pitta time. So that's when we should have our largest meal, because our body is more prepared to digest and then nourish ourselves. And then we have Vata time, which is the creative time, and that's between 2 and 6, so kind of like in the afternoon-ish. So I also like to help my clients, you know, once we have a better understanding of those particular doshas and how they rule the times of day, we can look at, okay, what are you trying to do throughout the day? And let's do an experiment. Let's try moving this, you know, meeting that you have every Monday at 9 a.m. that feels so heavy and unfocused and just lethargic and you don't want to be there. Let's try moving that to 10:30 or 11 and see if it makes a difference. And 9 times out of 10, it makes a huge difference. And so then, you know, we're like, okay, great, perfect. Let's move forward.
Yeah. I really like that. And I think I was talking to someone else about this, and I think it's in a very different way, but it is similar, that there's such a need in this like modern society, or people think there is, to be for immediacy, and people think they have to reply to stuff straight away, or they have to action things immediately, and you just don't. You know, I'm about to change it, but I've seen quite a few of these recently of like on like an auto reply to people's emails that'll say like, you know, between these hours I'm with my children, or I don't have my work email on my phone, it's only on my computer, so that I can have that separation. When I'm not working, I'm not working. And because no one who doesn't have a phone number for me is going to send me anything that's urgent. Like, they're just not. It might feel urgent, but it is not, because the people who have actual urgent things I already have a business relationship with, and therefore they have my actual phone number. So there's nothing that's going to come on an email that can't wait till the morning when I sign off in the afternoon. But that was quite a big shift for me, because there seems to be this, like, you know, more and more push, and I guess that's the thing of coming out of corporate into your own business. It can feel like you have to do things right away, and so it can feel quite frightening to say, oh, actually, from like 2 to 6, if I'm having my creative time, then I'm not going to check my emails. I'm going to put my phone away to do my creative stuff without distractions. And a lot of people can be quite resistant to that to start with, because it feels scary.
Well, you're right. Yeah, I think that particularly coming from a corporate environment, or not even really a corporate environment, I mean, because I used to be a teacher, right? But I feel like that immediacy was still required, just in a different way.
Parents can get real mad if you don't get back to them like in 5 minutes.
Oh, sure. Well, sure. But also you have to be immediately responsive to your children, to the children that you're working with, right? Yeah. And so it's this kind of sense of always being on, having to be so focused and so present, and having to be that way for 8 hours a day, particularly if it's something that doesn't give you fuel, doesn't give you purpose, doesn't give you excitement. That is extremely draining.
Yeah.
And it's not the way that we're supposed to be living our lives, right? No. We're supposed to be able to take a break if we're feeling overwhelmed, and, you know, go outside and take a walk around our house, or go take a walk around the block, or take our dog out. And we've created a society for ourselves where those things are not allowed, quote unquote.
Yeah.
And that's just silly. It's just so silly.
Yeah, and it doesn't, and I think sometimes when people feel this like disconnect with what they're doing and how they're feeling inside, it's often because that side is so missing, where they're not getting outside, or they're not prioritizing, you know, rest or relaxation time. And often if you can get them to do it, it's so helpful, because then you come to your desk much more focused, and you can get a lot more done in a shorter time, because you're rested and you've nourished your body and your soul.
Yeah, well, and you know, even if someone that's listening, say, does have a 9-to-5 and can't necessarily make the types of adjustments that you could make if you were a business owner, one of the things that I like to tell people that I work with who are in that place is, okay, what are the small things that you can do? So let's say that you're a person who works from home, you work a 9-to-5. Can you block off your calendar until 10 a.m.? Can you block off your calendar until 10 a.m. only on Monday?
Yeah.
Or maybe Monday and Friday? And just tell your boss, like, I can't take meetings during this time. I need to be able to get into the, you know, quote unquote office, get into my email, make sure that I know what I'm doing for the day, get myself prepared, right? That's just a little small, tiny thing, a way that you can still use these modalities to support you, even if you're not an entrepreneur.
Yeah, and so my husband has a 9-to-5, and he works from home most of the time. And when he's here, he's now started, at lunchtime, going out for a walk around the block. So even if it's only for like 10 or 15 minutes, but just to get some fresh air, get your body moving. And he's been really enjoying that. And then the other thing, and he's actually done the thing of saying between 5:30 and 7:30 when our daughter goes to bed, like, I won't, because he works across multiple time zones, so like LA is still very much in work hours then, but that's blocked off, and like, because normally his job is done by 5:36, but sometimes it isn't, but then he'll say, I will get to it, but it'll be after, but like those 2 hours are like, unless it's a proper emergency, that's like family time. And then if it's something semi-urgent, I will do it after bedtime rather than at 9 a.m. the next day or 8 a.m. But, you know, it's got to be a pretty good reason to miss that bit of the day. And that's really helped him feel like he's got some control over his work, even when it is really busy and he does need to be working more than the 9 to 5.
Yes, and that's so true. Is the desire for control can feel, or the control itself can feel kind of elusive when you're working for someone else, or when you're when you have to be available at certain times of the day. But to your point, there are choices that you can make that help you kind of balance that. And I think that that's why understanding your own energetic blueprint can be so powerful, because it can help you take back some of the control. It can help you set better boundaries, knowing, hey, I'm a person who is a little bit more spontaneous. I don't do really well with very rigid structure. Okay, that's in my astrology chart because I have a Gemini moon, right? Just an example. And I'm a Vata, primary Ayurvedic dosha. So I know that about myself, and I know that there's nothing wrong with me. That's just who I am. That's my energetic blueprint. So now that gives me the power to do something about it.
Yeah, and what you don't, yes, because some of those things can feel like, I'm going to say flaws, because that's how society sees them. And so understanding what they are and how you can work with them better in the environment you're in is really helpful, because then you're not internalizing that as something wrong with you. You just know that that thing about you doesn't fit very well with the world you're in, and so you can figure out ways to safeguard yourself even if you can't control everything about the environment. So you're understanding that it's not something wrong with you.
Yeah. And I think that that's the really beautiful thing about these modalities, is that for every piece of a particular archetype that might feel frustrating, there's an opposite side to that, where, okay, so yes, maybe let's see, I'm gonna use Capricorn, right? Because I'm a Capricorn rising. Let me use that as an example. So Capricorn can sometimes be seen as very rigid.
Yeah.
And that can feel frustrating for you as an individual if you feel like it keeps you, maybe holds you back from doing certain things. But let's think about that rigidity. Okay, so it can hold you back and keep you from doing certain things because maybe there's like this sense of, I can't be spontaneous, right? But then think about how that rigidity can be useful. Maybe I'm working on a project where we have to we have to create this structure and routine. We have this like huge event at work, maybe, let's say. And we've never done it before and we're really nervous. Well, I have Capricorn energy, so I can come in and I can help us create these structures and routines so that we're not running around at the last minute thinking like that we missed something. Right? I can kind of pay attention to how we're doing things, and I can write them down, and I can create a process so that when we get to the day before the event, I can say to everybody, I can start delegating, and I can say to everybody, okay, these are all the things that we need to do, right? And so that's the structure and routine and quote unquote rigidity that's where it could be an asset. So I think that it's important to think about it in that way, that each person has a unique gift. Each person has something special that they're bringing to the table. And just because it may not necessarily be something that is valued by this person over here doesn't necessarily mean it wouldn't be valued by this person over here. Go where you feel valued, or create spaces where you feel valued. Yeah.
And that stuff is so helpful, because the more you know yourself and your strengths and weaknesses, the more you can work with them. Like you say, it's much easier to bring value if you understand better, like the value that you have to bring. And it's much
Absolutely.
easier to deal with your weaknesses if you understand them, because then it doesn't feel like a huge shock when stuff doesn't go well, because you understand that might be an area where you need to bring in some more support, or you need to ask for help in some kind of way.
Yeah, I used to work as a former teacher, and then after I was a teacher, I worked in the ed tech space. I worked a lot with emotional intelligence and social and emotional learning, particularly with kids, right? Because it was education, but I think it's also important skills that we as adults can focus on. And I think that the most powerful language that I learned from understanding emotional intelligence is that it is not necessarily a weakness, it is an area for improvement. And even just changing that one little piece of language so that you no longer consider yourself to be weak, but perhaps just see that as a place where you can strengthen it, right? It's a growth mindset, is what some people will say in the emotional intelligence space.
Yeah.
I think that can be a really powerful way to kind of take back some of the things that we don't necessarily feel good about in ourselves.
Yeah, and I've actually talked to quite a lot of like mindset coaches here, and I think what's interesting is that a lot of it is about just how you're talking to yourself. So understanding, like you say, using slightly different language can just reframe something enough that it's not holding you back in the same way, because you're internalizing it slightly differently. And yeah, you're seeing it as something that is fixable, where I guess if you see it as like a weakness rather than an area for improvement, it just feels like a default rather than a skill that can be helped to improve. And it's easier to improve something if your internal monologue isn't constantly chucking more mud at it and making you feel bad about it.
Definitely.
It's amazing how those little tiny shifts can really, they sound so small, but they can actually make really big differences.
Yeah, and I was just talking to someone about that yesterday, that it's important. You really, the only way to get to know yourself better is just by practicing and being curious. And I know that can feel frustrating because we're in a culture where we want that immediacy. Well, this is something I don't like about myself, so I want it to be fixed now. It's not how it works.
No, and I think I'm gonna hazard a guess that anyone who follows anything I do is probably either that's something they really want to work on, or they already have. Because I mean, it's literally, I go on about it so much, but I'm more about like very slow, sustainable change, but that's actually going to last. So that the idea is in 3 months, 6 months, a year, you can look back and see, but you won't necessarily notice it day to day, or something bad will happen. You'll have a bad day, and you'll notice that 3 months ago or 6 months ago that would have sent you into a tailspin for like a year or for like a week, but this time it's only like been a day or two because your resilience has got better or whatever it is. But yeah, I'm really big on small, slow change that actually lasts.
Well, and my question is, why wouldn't you want to invest that time in yourself?
Yeah, and most people, by the time they're coming to coaching or to find someone to help solve these problems, they've tried a lot of these quick fixes already, and they've probably tried some of these people who are selling like fix everything with my simple 3-step program, and it hasn't worked for them because their issues are more complex than that. Lots of those programs do work for some people or for maybe even like 50%, 60% of people, because lots of people, it is quite simple. But the kind of people who end up needing coaching, it tends to, because there's more than one thing going on at once and lots of complex things like intertwined. I know you say with the stuff that you do, there's often something like energetically or inside them that's not working, and then there's resistance. So any of the changes aren't going to work because the fundamentals aren't quite right somehow.
Yeah, and I think that's kind of where human design can come into play as well. That's a modality that I am not as familiar with, but I do understand kind of the basics of, and I think that that can be a really powerful modality for people to learn more about, especially their design type, because it can really tell you there's like the self and the not self. And you understanding what types of emotions might arise for you when you're living in your not self. So for me, I'm a generator in human design, and my not self is frustration. So when I'm feeling frustrated, that can immediately be a clue to me that I'm perhaps not living in my design, and I'm not making choices that are going to be beneficial. And so that, again, that's just another layer of understanding ourselves and how we work, and what our purpose is, if we want to call it that. Some people call it dharma. There's so many words, but I think that, actually, speaking about purpose too, I think that can shift and change. It's not something that has to be just one target that you look at for the rest of your life. And I think that's where, when people come for coaching, and I'm not sure if you've noticed this, but when people come to me for coaching, there's often this desire to set one goalpost and never move it.
Yeah.
And that can be a recipe for disaster, because as we learn and grow and gain new experiences, and even just life in general can come in, and then all of a sudden that goalpost that we set has to be moved. It has to be moved. There's no way.
Yeah.
And so it's important to maybe like not set it in concrete, but maybe just to kind of gently place it in the ground so that you can lift it up and move it in a different direction. And it doesn't necessarily have to be something that you're constantly pushing off necessarily, but you're just kind of making adjustments so that it continues to align with who you are and what your experience is as a human.
Yeah, I actually work with a lot of new mums, and so that's a time when, for a lot of people, one of the reasons it can be very unsettling is because that's often a time where suddenly you feel like all of your values and goals and everything has changed. And for a lot of people that feels like such a big core identity shift that they don't know what to do with it. So I actually deal with that like a lot. And I also, before I started doing that, one of my sort of smaller pieces for people who aren't ready for full coaching, it is like a goal setting thing, and I meet with people like every 2 to 3 months, and I make people set things in 12-week chunks. And some people find that very challenging because, like you say, they'll have this one big fixed goal and they find it hard to break that down, or they find it hard to think of 3 much smaller things and go to them slowly. But actually, if you can get them to do it even for one thing, they'll normally see much quicker the kind of results, because it's more granular, and it's like a reward system because you keep getting to be like, oh, I did this. Go.
Right.
But also it helps you identify like that maybe the big goal isn't quite right, actually, even though you think it is, because you suddenly realize that even though you think you're moving forward to that goal, you're actually moving in a slightly different line, and that big goal actually needs to be something slightly different, or that you're actually getting joy out of something. It might not even be a huge difference, but it might be that like it turns out the fulfillment is more important than the financial reward, or there can be these little shifts, and it's much easier to see how to move that big goal when you're getting the little stuff right, and suddenly your day-to-day is much happier. You're like, oh, this is the one that I want to follow.
Yeah.
But it can be hard because I think it's drilled into us from really young, like, oh, you've got to have these big like 4 goals each year that are like, I want to earn this much money and save up for this vacation or get this car or whatever. And so it can be hard to move away from those things as feeling like what you have to be working towards.
Sure. Well, I mean, I think in general in our society, both personally and professionally, goals are seen as non-negotiable and non-shifting. right? So like if you think about working in a corporate space, and I used to work in corporate marketing, and we had to set goals at the end of the year for the coming year, and we had to know, like we had to be able to predict like this is where we want to go by in the next 12 months, and then we had to report on those every 3 months.
Yeah.
And what happens if, like, for instance, in 2020 COVID happened and we were working with schools, and all of a sudden schools shut down.
Yeah.
So then we had to go back and like reevaluate all of our goals, and it was really stressful, and it was just kind of like I don't want to say we set ourselves up for failure, because obviously, in business you need to be able to have some predictability, and you need to be able to show growth and that sort of thing, but we can't get so caught up in things having to be this one way and not being able to have any sort of like change or shift or fluidity in those types of experiences. I mean, I think about that too, as someone who used to be a teacher.
Mm-hmm.
I had specific foundational goals for each of the students in the grade levels, because I was a music teacher, so I had to teach kindergarten through 5th grade.
Mm-hmm.
And each grade level had their own particular set of skills that they had to learn by the end of the year.
Yeah.
And one of the things that I loved being a music teacher is that I didn't have a curriculum. So as long as I made sure that those students met those goals and learned those things,
Mm-hmm.
I could teach them however I wanted to.
Yeah.
But, someone else who maybe was a classroom teacher, they had a specific curriculum that they had to teach. And so there was a lot more structure and rigidity within that. So it's just interesting how we can take those experiences and bring them into our personal lives.
Yeah.
And think, okay, I did it that way at work, so I have to do it that way in my life. And it may not even be a conscious decision.
No, you just
that
think,
you're
that's
making.
the way it is. If you're doing this, that's
Right.
how we do it.
Right.
Yeah,
So something to think about.
Yeah, really, really interesting. Thank you so much. This has been so interesting, especially because I think for some people this is probably like feels pretty out there what you do, but it's actually like really grounded in like practical life advice as well as the spiritual side. And I really find it interesting how you've managed to like join those two things together.
I'm continually trying to bring those two things together, yes.
It's really awesome. So if people want to find out more about it, what kind of things can they do
Sure.
with you?
Absolutely. Well, so if you are a business owner, I have a membership community, and I would love for people to join us. It's a really small, intimate community. I try to keep it below 15 members, especially because a lot of us are neurodiverse. And so having those really intimate connections is really important.
Mm-hmm.
That's called the Venusian Society. And then I also have astrology readings that I do for people. You don't have to be a business owner. I've done astrology readings for all sorts of people. Typically, people come to me when they're in kind of a transition in their lives,
Mm-hmm.
and they're just looking for more guidance. And you can find those on my website as well. And I'd be happy to support anyone who's interested.
Awesome. Thank you so much. It's been so interesting.
Yes, thank you so much for having me. This is a fantastic conversation.